The world of football with a soccer perspective. This is Soccer Today with Duane, Rollins and Kevin Laramee. Live on the Sports Podcasting Network.
Good day, good night, and welcome to Soccer Today. For the 1000th time, this is Kevin Laramee, joined by Duane Rollins as always. And to celebrate, or just to do a normal show, because that's what we do, to talk about the U.S. men's national team, joining us on the line today from Yahoo Sports, soccer writer, and also U.S. men's national team insider, Doug McIntyre. How you doing today, Doug?
I'm doing well, Kevin. Congrats on the 1000th show.
1,000 shows is a lot of shows, most certainly, but it seems like it's more somehow, Doug. Thanks for coming on. Obviously, we're going to start with the U.S. men's national team. The natives are not happy right now in the U.S. men's national team fan base, a 3-0 loss last week. So I guess my first question is are people right to be frightened, or was this just kind of a friendly and you shouldn't get too worked up about a result like that?
Yeah, it's a good question, Duane. I mean, I think you can't look at this result and this performance in a vacuum. I think you have to look at the larger context of where this program has been over the last couple of years, really since they failed to qualify for the World Cup coming up on 2 years ago next month. And that's, that's why I think it's a bit concerning more than anything for U.S. fans. I think U.S. fans can stomach losing a friendly match. But if the U.S. lost the Gold Cup final to Mexico last month, and this is a program that fans are desperately trying to find anything to get excited about. So when you come out 2 months after losing that Gold Cup final, you want to see something. And what the U.S. produced on Friday night wasn't good enough. And, to get routed at home by your biggest rival in the fashion they did, fans are right to be disappointed. I mean, it's really hard for a lot of people to support this team right now. There's a lot of people that want this team desperately to succeed, and I'm not sure that they're seeing the same sort of progress that U.S. coach Greg Berhalter claims that he's seeing. And it is a bit worrying because you look at that game, and it was clear in the first half that things weren't working, and there wasn't much of an adjustment by Berhalter, and he said afterwards that was the plan. But I think it's fair to wonder if his plan makes sense at this point. I mean, he's insisting on the United States playing out of the back in situations where it's clearly not working. If we looked at Friday's match, they were unable to deal with Mexico's pressure, and rather than vary it up and kick long and try to get around the press that way, they insisted on playing out of the back, and there was a number of times where they could have easily been burned for a goal, and eventually that happened on the second goal. There were unforced errors being made all over the field. This team does not look comfortable playing that way. And I think people are right to say, is the player pool capable of playing the same sort of style that we see Manchester City and Liverpool play, where they're using their goalkeeper as an outlet? And these are, two of the best goalkeepers with their feet in the world in Alisson and Ederson. And Zach Steffen's a terrific goalie. I'm not sure that that's his strength. And also club teams are able to work on this every single day in training. And national teams just aren't. So to expect the U.S. to be able to play that way with guys coming in from all over the world and only a few training sessions. And if you guys know anything about the international game, the training sessions, a lot of times they're recovery. Guys are recovering from long flights. We're not talking about the sorts of training that you're going to get in, for instance, preseason with a club team. So I think there's U.S. fans are right to be a bit worried about where the program is now. I know they all want the national team to succeed, but again, it's really hard to get excited about this program now for the majority of U.S. fans, and it's been that way for the last couple of years now, which is very concerning, I think, for U.S. soccer.
I asked my followers on Saturday in a Twitter poll what they felt was the biggest reason for the USMNT's struggles, and it was kind of a split result. No one really had a clear answer. The options I provided were, was it USSF, was it MLS, was it coaching, or was nothing happening, and this just is where the talent is? I'm wondering where you would fall on that question. But what is the biggest one factor, if there is one, for the U.S. men's national team struggle right now?
Well, there's a few things I think, Duane. The one thing I would point to, and a number of players spoke about this after the match, most notably Christian Pulisic, obviously the biggest star for the U.S., who was clearly very visibly frustrated during and after the match. He talked about how the U.S. was playing scared. They were fearful of Mexico. This is not a team that's playing with confidence right now, and I think that's the biggest issue. You can talk about the player pool. There was a number of starting players, 5 or 6 players that normally would have been starting, if they were healthy and available, that were not involved in this match. So I think that's important to point out. Also important to point out that Mexico didn't field its top lineup either, although arguably a stronger team than they had at the Gold Cup, with a number of players returning. Chicharito gets the first goal in the match. He wasn't part of the Gold Cup. There were a number of other players as well. So that for me is the biggest thing. This team does not look confident at the moment. And if you're not confident as an individual or as a team, you're not going to have good results. So for me, the big challenge is for this team is to find its confidence somehow, and I'm not sure exactly how to do that. I mean, I think a more simple approach is required. And Pulisic talked about this as well. That the U.S. they look like they're overthinking things. It's not coming naturally, and maybe that's the point. Maybe that's the idea that you work on this until it becomes second nature. But really, I mean, for me, if I'm the coach of this team, I think the thing that you're trying to do is get the confidence back, and maybe the way to do that is to be a bit more simplistic in the approach. Concentrate on defensive shape and picking your spots going forward, the things that historically have helped the U.S. team punch above its weight at the international level for a long, long time, until that disaster of a qualifying campaign 2 years ago. So for me, that's the biggest thing.
You mentioned the lack of confidence, Doug, and for me, I'm looking at their schedule. Of course, the friendly schedule: Mexico last Friday, tomorrow Uruguay. We're looking at a decision to play teams that, yes, will draw the crowds, yes, will draw the viewership on television, but on the field, we're talking about opponents that are not easy to play against, and a young new core of U.S. men's national team players, especially with the absence of Bradley and Altidore. I'm just wondering if there would have been a way to do this a bit differently, because it is CONCACAF after all. The United States will be getting ready for CONCACAF Nations League against Cuba in October and against Canada as well. Wouldn't it have been maybe a way to build some confidence playing, I don't want to say smaller countries, but playing against countries that are maybe more relevant to our region?
Yeah, I don't know, Kevin. It's a good question. I think that as the United States, you want to play the best teams you can every single time. You want to play the hardest schedule you can. I don't think there's enough games against top teams for a lot of the nations in CONCACAF. I was asked, last week, should the U.S. be playing Mexico again after having just played them in the Gold Cup final? Yes, absolutely. That's the best match they can play. That's a rivalry game. It's a quality team, and it's a game that team wants to win badly. I mean, again, I talked about the context of the match on Friday night. If you're playing, there was a match the U.S. played against Chile, another excellent team, the reigning South American champions. They played against them in March. They got a draw in that game, and it was a good test, I think, for the U.S. That match. It's certainly another pressing team like Mexico, and they learned a lot from that match. And I think playing the top teams in the world, you do. Against Mexico, it's a little bit of a different story. I think that as a rival, you can experiment against top teams, but at some point when you're playing Mexico, you want to win that game, especially after you just lost the regional final against that team. So I don't have a problem with the schedule. I do think if you're going to experiment, maybe your biggest rival is not the opponent that you want to do that against. But certainly have no problem playing a team like Uruguay. They're not at full strength. They're missing a number of their key players: Luis Suarez, Edison Cavani, Diego Godin, the captain, not there. And it'll be a good test for the U.S., which will also be shorthanded. In addition to the players that weren't called in or that are injured for this camp, they also released 6 players back to their clubs, including Christian Pulisic and a number of other starters. So it'll be an interesting test tomorrow night against Uruguay with a different lineup, and we'll see how the United States responds.
The CONCACAF Nations League, the proper one, not the qualifying, is upon us, and I'm wondering, what is your thought personally, and maybe for the potential of this competition with in mind the United States side of things, is it a competition that U.S. men's national team fans should be excited for, or because of the statue of U.S. men's national team, is it just some not waste, more glorified friendly, but it doesn't seem to have the same weight as, example, for Canada, which is our bread and butter. It's our only lifeline. So I'm wondering, what do you think about the CONCACAF Nations League?
To be perfectly honest, it doesn't really move the needle, I don't think, for U.S. fans. I don't think playing Cuba is going to get anybody excited. No disrespect to them. Canada, a little bit of a different story. I think that's more of an interesting opponent. Games between the United States and Canada are usually close. They're hotly contested. I think it's cool that the United States will play in Canada. It's always good to go on the road and play some teams. And it's important to the United States in terms of the FIFA rankings. We know that that's what's going to determine the fields for the hexagonal and World Cup qualifying next year. So they are meaningful games. They do matter in that sense. But in terms of U.S. fans being excited for them, I would be hard pressed to think that most fans are licking their lips waiting for the United States to play against the Cuban team that just got beaten 6-0 by Canada, to be perfectly honest.
It's 13-0 in the last few times they played. Not a lot of opposition there, to be blunt. Doug, let's talk about World Cup qualifying. I'll actually be on Extra Time Radio today. I guess they don't call it radio anymore. Just Extra Time today to discuss this, to debate this with the guys there that think it's a fair format or fairer than what we think up here. I'm wondering what your perspective is on the CONCACAF World Cup qualifying. Is it fair? Is it the right approach that they're taking?
I liked it the way it was before, Duane, where you had the semifinal round and the final round. And I always think it's better to play games to get in. And the semifinal round was always interesting. In some ways, it was trickier than the final round because there were fewer games, so less margin for error. And if there was a result that went the wrong way, it could add some pressure. And we saw that. We've seen that with the United States in the past, where they go into the final match day in the semifinal round needing a win. I remember a match against Guatemala, I think back in 2012, but the U.S. needed results in that match, went down early in Kansas City, and were forced to come back. And I think that sort of pressure is important. So I would always rather see the hexagonal field determined on the pitch as opposed by rankings. Now you can argue it's being determined on the pitch because of the rankings, but again, I would prefer to see the system and the format stay the way it was as opposed to the Nations League. I know the Nations League is important for a lot of the smaller teams, but to be quite honest, for the United States and Mexico, that are going to be in the top 6 in the rankings, I really don't think it helps them that much, and I think it's going to be tricky to go directly into the hexagonal round. I think it was nice for the bigger teams to get their feet wet in qualifying a bit. Those matches are never easy. It's not easy playing on the road in CONCACAF. You want to use players and see how they respond in those sorts of difficult conditions. Again, the Nations League provides that opportunity a little bit, but it's not quite the same. Not quite the same as a World Cup qualifier. So again, if it was up to me, I would have left it the way it was.
Doug, sports writer for Yahoo Sports. I love your column, 24 Thoughts. And I'm wondering, Doug, before we let you go for today, what thought can you share with us about U.S. men's national team or Major League Soccer or just soccer?
Well, I think you'll have to wait till Thursday till it comes out, Kevin. I want to keep it a little bit close to the vest. There's always a lot to talk about, and every week I go into writing that column and wondering how I'm going to come up with 24 thoughts. But I always end up with stuff on the table. I think there's always a lot to talk about when it comes to American soccer, when it comes to MLS and qualifying, and certainly after coming out of the international break, I think that there'll be plenty to talk about. And it's going to be exciting to see the MLS schedule resume. I know there was a number of games last weekend, and there will be some midweek as well. But it's hard for me to follow MLS, to be honest, during the international breaks. I don't find it compelling. I said this on a show last week. I think that playing league games during international windows makes a mockery of the competition. I don't think it's fair to fans. I don't think it's fair to players teams, and I think it's something that needs to change. And I know I mentioned that in the last 24 thoughts, but that's something. If I'm asked about it, I'm going to say it, and I think a lot of people are saying it. We've seen players speak out about it, and I look forward to the day when MLS is not competing with international breaks, and where every MLS game has all the best players available. And I think that's an expectation fans should have. That's the way it is around the world, and it needs to be that way in Major League Soccer as well.
We hope that day comes soon as well. Doug McIntyre, soccer writer for Yahoo Sports, thank you very much for your time today, and we'll see you at a stadium soon.
Thanks, guys. Anytime.
And we'll be right back after this short break.
You are listening to Soccer Today. Follow us on Twitter at Soccer Today SPN and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Sports Podcasting Network. You can find the podcast version of all the shows we do on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Google Play Store, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, and anywhere you get your podcast.
And we're back on Soccer Today. I'm Kevin Laramee. You can follow me on Twitter at Kev Laramee. Duane Rollins as well. You can follow him at 24th Minute. The 1000th show, our 1000th soccer show together, Duane and I, talking about soccer. And you know what word, Duane, that came up the most in our entirety of shows? And no, it's not soft benefit. It's not turf. It's not allocation. The one word that we've said the most on our show is Canada.
That stands to reason. Our origin, of course, is a Canadian soccer podcast. I think Soccer Today now is a North American soccer podcast with our Two Solitudes show, which does supplement that with the pure Canadian focus there. But we never lose sight of our roots, and we have a national team game to talk about on our 1000th show, which I think is highly appropriate.
It's very appropriate. What's surprising about it, it's the win, 6-0 against Cuba. First hat trick for Junior Hoilett in his career in the opening game of the CONCACAF Nations League Group A in League A. So that was first of all, it's always fun to watch Canada score 6 goals. I can get used to this. That's what I said in the last time they played Cuba, which finished 7-0. It's easy to say, oh, it's a great success. It's awesome. Jonathan David, 11 goals scored in 9 games. He's gonna beat the record before he turns 22.
He might beat the record against Cuba this week. That's probably unlikely. That he needs a few more there, but no. Again, the goal he scored was not a Canadian-like goal, and I appreciate the defense was probably lacking there a little bit in terms of the overall skill, but to get that to beat that man on the dribble twice before putting the ball between the keeper's legs was a remarkable goal in front of the South End. One of the prettiest goals we'll see at BMO Field this year. Unfortunately, only 10,000 people saw it, but it's Cuba, and TFC was playing at the same night, so I don't know why they scheduled it like that, but nonetheless they did. It was a full performance by Canada. You can't say much about it, though, because it's 6-0 and it was Cuba. They did what they had to do. They needed to pile the scores up because, if they want to advance, there is a possibility that if they've split the games with the U.S., split the points with the U.S., that it might come down to goal differential in this. So it was important to put 6 goals past them and hope that maybe the U.S. can't do the same, because the U.S. will likely go into the games with them, I suspect, with a much lesser lineup than they're capable of. So it's possible that Canada could score more goals than this, and Canada's not in the position right now. I would think that they can be taking anyone lightly, even Cuba. So they went out and got the job done. It was a fun night at the stadium. I think that it'll be a funner night at the stadium against the U.S. in November. I hope you get those tickets out there and see them. It should be a lot to, there should be opportunity there to get those, but I think it'll be a much more full crowd that night.
Yeah, no, it'll be full, and there'll be a lot more fans of the United States present as well than there was from Cuba. But you mentioned exactly. That was the point. You mentioned Canada still has a chance, and one of the reasons is because there was a very surprising result happening yesterday In the Nations League in CONCACAF, the team we talked about on Friday, Bermuda, helped Canada by beating Panama in a competitive game, robbing Panama some crucial FIFA ranking points that Canada then might have a chance to bridge that gap. Maybe not fully, but it's the first of many positive, and I would say needed result for Canada to eventually try to qualify for the Hex. One of the first needed result was Bermuda beating Panama, and it happened. Who said that things are predictable?
And good for Bermuda, more to the point. I'm not too worked up about the points because I just simply don't believe that Canada has enough opportunity to get them. They'd have to be nearly perfect. But nonetheless, I think that is a positive result for the region as a whole, because you'd like to see a country like Bermuda do well, step up and push the envelope a little bit more, as we talked about on Friday. But you're right. If some people's explaining the points are to believed, and the complicated thing about this is you can have it's math, yes, which should be literal, but there's lots of interpretation of whether there's enough points there or not. Some people do believe it's possible, but it would definitely involve the other teams dropping as well as Canada rising. So this is a step in that direction. I have said a few times before, and I will repeat it now, that as much as you can maybe make an argument that the repechage, the kids' table, whatever you want to call it, might be the easier path, I still think the better path is the Hex, and that Canada needs to be in those games to improve, because that's my biggest fear actually with the format. Isn't necessarily which way is easier. It's that one way is definitely testing teams and improving them through tests, because just as Doug said in his answer about whether the U.S. should be playing big countries or little countries, basically, he said that they should be tested, and that's how you get better. I think it's the same thing with Canada, and if you're playing in that kids' table, then you're not getting better. You're winning. You're putting up 6-goal games, and that's fun, but you're not improving. And when you do actually play a real team, that's my biggest fear with whoever comes out of that side, is they're going to blast teams, and then suddenly they're going to face whoever's fourth in the Hex, and that's going to be a battle-tested team, and they might just roll them. That'd be my fear out of that. So yes, I want Canada in that Hex, even if it means it's a slightly more difficult path to the World Cup, because if you're going to make the World Cup, the other part too is you're going to make the World Cup, you want to be battle-tested, because you don't want to be embarrassed when you're there. No,
exactly. Just asked, I forgot. Wasn't it Ecuador? No, not Ecuador. Peru, who qualified for the first Cup for the first time and had a couple of tough results at the World Cup, but let's not kid ourselves. It would be the same if we make it to the World Cup. Our first World Cup wouldn't be like easy and make it at the group stage and qualify for the quarters. Well, 16th in the quarters now. It'll be difficult. One tweet. It's rare that I do a tweet breakdown, but Duane, you mentioned one of the dangers of this Canadian men's national team is it gives hope. It might gives you a little bit of hope again. And hope is dangerous. Hope can lead to heartbreak. But when you look at this roster, at this squad of maybe the best ever Canadian men's national team squad ever put together, who knows? But what does give you hope, and what does refrain from having hope?
Well, I mean, the front line. I mean, they were even missing what arguably their best pure striker is Cavini, who's, I think, really has the ability to break down CONCACAF defenses in a way that the other guys can't, where their speed sort of draws them out. So you have those two folks out there, and you can score. This team can score, and that's exciting. That's fun to watch. It doesn't take rocket science to say what's wrong with the Canadian men's national team. I mean, we have eyes and the understanding of the sport at a basic level. Their backline's pretty raw. So
again, I'm gonna reiterate: you're a soccer dad or a soccer mom in Canada right now with a kid between 10 to 16. Duane, play him as defenders.
Yeah, I mean, look, I like Daniel Henry. I really do. He's a nice guy, but I don't know if he's an international quality defender. I think he's an MLS quality defender. I don't know if he's an international level guy, right? And they not only need him, they rely on him. Hey, he scored too on the weekend. I don't know if that's necessarily going to be something you can rely on.
That doesn't help.
But not what we're talking about here. But no, they've got to get some improvement back there. They've got to get some improvement back on the fullback position. I mean, I think John Herdman needs to understand CONCACAF a little bit more. It was good to hear him say in the media availability last week that his quote-unquote ego got in the way when he was playing that second half against Haiti and didn't drop back and play a more defensive style to protect a significant lead. That is good for him to have learned. You'd rather he had learned it in a friendly if he had booked any.
Yeah.
He learned it at the Gold Cup, and at least it was not in World Cup qualifying. So that's true. That's something to build upon. I mean, look, I know a lot of people like they should have beaten Haiti. They just should have beat Haiti. That's something you hear all the time, like, oh, they're not even good enough to beat Haiti. Well, they had a really crappy half against Haiti. I'm not overly concerned about that isolated result because I think the overall trend of the talent, particularly the attacking talent, still is the net positive, right? Mm-hmm. So the U.S., I'm looking forward to the U.S. game. They need to be tested. That backline needs to be pushed. This is the opportunity that they missed out by losing that second half against Haiti is to play, they did play Mexico obviously in the group stage, but to play a meaningful game that means a lot in terms of if you do believe in the hex thing to them with a team that, although struggling, is struggling at a level above them, right? Like they're still going to be the favorite heading into those games and for Canada, but not an untouchable favorite either. I think Canada legitimately has a chance to win the home game, and that will be a really big marker for the program, who has not literally won against the U.S. on either side of the gender since the 90s and hasn't won against the men on the 80s. So it would be nice to get that monkey off their back.
It's quite a monkey at this point. It's a big monkey.
I apologize. 2003. The women won in 2003, but that's more than a decade ago.
Yeah, at this point it's 16 years ago, which is it's a teenager. There's a difference of a teenager there. Like some players in the national team program were like one the last time Canada beat the United States. But I do feel it is positive. You mentioned John Herdman, the game in Haiti in the Gold Cup, and we're seeing Canada score a lot of goals. Of course, Cuba, you mentioned that 13-0 in aggregate in the two games they played this year so far between Cuba and Canada. But I do feel, Duane, that there's a certain amount of learning that John Herdman is going through. And of course, it's all well and good scoring 6 goals against Cuba, having a very offensive mindset, and seeing young offensive players being able to break through defenders, break through goalkeepers, and score a ton of goals. It's always positive. I am looking forward, though, to when the tactics of the international game and what Doug said earlier, to keep it simple. We said the same thing last week on the show, where simpler tactics on the international level, dumb it down just a little, but execute to perfection, brings result. And I cannot wait to see Canada grind out a 1-0 win versus a good opposition because of a grind out tactic. Yes, we know they can score goals when the opposition is not up to their level yet. We've seen it. What I want to see is when it's not going your way and you still find a way to grind that result.
Well, yeah, the Haiti issue was that things started to turn away from them and they couldn't pull the game back. So that's not a great sign, but that is probably a sign of their youth as much as anything else. Have they learned from that? Can they manage games a little bit better? That is the most difficult thing, I think, for any young player to learn at the international level, is how to game manage. And it doesn't help. And I'm not trying to throw John Herdman completely under the bus here, but I do believe that the biggest difference between the men's and the women's games is just that. He did not have to manage a lot of games at the women's side because they were either heavy favorites or they were up against the U.S. and they were heavy underdogs. There wasn't a lot of sort of that in-between being tested kind of stuff that you see constantly in CONCACAF qualifying. I mean, they would face it 3 or 4 times a cycle, not 3 or 4 times a month if they're playing all the time, right? I guess they don't play 3 or 4 times in a month. That would be a very busy month for the Canadian men's national team, but, they play more often. So it's something that I think is that he has to learn and the players have to learn, and it's not ideal that they're learning it together, but that boat has sailed, and John Herdman is the coach, so we move forward with him.
Yep, we move forward with John Herdman. Tomorrow, Canada-Cuba, the second straight game between the two in the home and away series in the opening weekend of the CONCACAF Nations League. This one is in the Cayman Islands, and fun times. there's a game that might not be important on paper happening as well. I think it's tonight or tomorrow. The Bahamas versus Bonaire. I think it's important to note just because of what the Bahamas just went through with Hurricane Dorian, and now they have to play Bonaire. Hopefully the situation for fans, I've been trying to look to see if I can get some news to see if there's postponement or anything in this game. Of course, as is often the case when we're trying to get news in soccer in the Caribbean, it's not quite easy. But supposedly it is going according to plans. The Bahamas versus Bonaire in the Nations League of CONCACAF as well.
That's good to hear. Yeah, I did think about that as well when I was watching the news on the weekend. The news that didn't involve, Sharpies. So that is good to hear that they're doing that and that they're getting it out there. I mean, sport is a funny thing when you're talking about this, and it's kind of a cliche to say, there are more important things. We all understand that, but I think that trying to normalize as quickly as possible is also important for people that have been affected by disasters like this. And not that a soccer game is going to solve anything or fix anything, but it is nice to, as I say, to normalize as quickly as possible. And if they can get the game underway, then good for them. Look, more to a global point when it relates to the show, what the Nations League's about. I've watched, I certainly haven't watched all of it. That would be way too much for any rational, sane human being. But
there's not enough time in a day. There's more than 24 games that happened in the last 3 days. Like, how the heck do you want to watch that?
Sure, but I've watched enough that some of the quality is lacking for sure. I mean, I think some of the quality, like a CIS team, would probably be able to beat some of those teams for sure. Like York University would beat the League C teams type deal, and that's okay. The idea behind this is to get them playing like-minded, skilled opposition, and hopefully that will help them improve. So I think it's been overall a success the opening week, and there's still a lot more games to go. And look, it compels me more than European qualifying, certainly with the expanded European Championship qualifying format, like the 24 team is going. It's a lot more difficult to get pumped up by those games than it was in the past. So
I have to say, sorry, Duane, I'm just going to say the Germany-Netherlands game this weekend, that was a heck of a game. Like, I watched that one and I was like, wow, the Netherlands coming back from behind, beating Germany in Germany. That was quite the result for the Netherlands. But no, I agree with you. There's a lot of non-compelling games in European qualifiers.
Yeah, the European qualifiers get interesting towards the end, but it's a funny interesting too. If you remember the last cycle, it's not necessarily Germany Netherlands is compelling on its own accord because of the history of that rivalry and the fact that the Dutch are rising back up after a slow time in their history of the past two major tournaments. But really, where you get very interesting games is when you have those mid-level teams. Like if you recall, those that remember, it was obviously the international debut of Iceland at a major championship. Albania qualified. Countries of that level. Hungary was there, like a team that we haven't seen in a major championship for a long time. And that's kind of where the interest comes in, when those teams are playing off to grab those last few spots and the nations that you're not necessarily used to seeing at major tournaments. And I think that does overall add value to the tournament, but it does take away from qualifying. There's no doubt about it. Makes it more interesting to me. That it makes it easier for me to choose to watch the Nations League, to watch, islands play each other.
Well, and we kind of, it's closer to home geographically, yes, but it does integrate with our pathway to the World Cup, our pathway to the Gold Cup, the Nations League. We are in CONCACAF, and we have to embrace the fact that we're in CONCACAF, and we have to be realistic of our positioning in CONCACAF to truly be able to climb that rankings, right? We are right now, 60, 70th in the world? We're top 10 in CONCACAF at best? 6 to 10 position probably, closer to 10 than 6. We have to be realistic about it. Yeah, 8, exactly. So we have to be realistic to what is needed to be done and where to go. And watching our region does give us a bit of an idea of where we need to go and where we do stand as well. Because we know the players that play for Canada. We see them day in, day out in their club games, either here in the MLS, either in Europe as well, mostly now. Some in Liga MX, almost no, if none, unattached FC players. So it is a positive. We know our players, and to rank them versus players in the region, it does give us a positive outlook for where the Canadian men's national team is going. But you're right. CONCACAF is now more important to me than European qualifiers or UEFA. I'm becoming a nerd, I think. It took 1,000 show, but now I'm becoming a soccer nerd.
Just now, eh?
Yeah. Just
Just
now.
now
Sure.
happening. Yeah. We run a sports podcasting network. We crossed the nerd threshold 990 shows ago. Let's not get ourselves here.
Well, I think
we
I
have
crossed.
an Olympic show, Kevin.
That's true. I did cross that threshold when I sat down and watched about 20 games of the Cricket World Cup this summer. I was like, yeah, no one knows about cricket. What am I doing? But it was so fun to watch.
There you go. Cricket is maybe the last bastion that I have not crossed into. I don't know. I just don't have 4 weeks to give away to. I know the 2020 is different, but
you just watch highlights. That's what I do. You watch the highlight package, the 1 hour show that resumes a day of action. That's awesome. Speaking of that's awesome, tomorrow big game, Canada, Cuba. Well, big game, Cuba, Canada, Cayman Islands. United States men's national team versus Uruguay as well will be an interesting game tomorrow night. A lot more games, of course, around the world. The international break is almost over. Just bear with us for a couple more days, and the club game is back this weekend. And it'll be fascinating as always. And as always, you can follow Duane on social media at 24th Minute, myself at Kev Laramee, and this show at Soccer Today SPN, live Monday to Friday, 11 a.m. Hope you enjoy the new look on today's show, and we hope you enjoy what we do. And if you do so, make sure you subscribe, and maybe, if you can, help us financially by going to patreon.com/sports podcasting network. $2 a month will give you access to our exclusive To Solitude Soccer podcast, where we talk about the Canadian Premier League, Canadian soccer as a whole, but only Canadian soccer. Last week, we did have Rob Friend on the show. The week before, Joe Bellin, Canadian Youth International. And also, we did have the commissioner of the Canadian Premier League a few weeks ago. So, a great show. Make sure you subscribe for $2 a month. It helps us pay the bill and keep the lights on, and it helps us continue to devote more time to talk about Canadian soccer. But until tomorrow, as always, have a great soccer.
You can find the podcast version of all the shows we do on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Google Play Store, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, and anywhere you get your podcast.